section we would focus on the medieval and the modern literature. Now before we begin with, let's understand what is literature. So any writing form which comprises of letters in a meaningful literary meaning is what is known as literature. Now this could be in the form of fiction, non-fiction, poetry, drama, short plays, legends, fables, or any other thing. Now what we are trying to understand is a difference between the didactic and the narrative styles, and later on we'll understand the medieval and the modern literature in detail. So when it comes to didactic style, it's a kind of directive style that is there. It aims to persuade the reader to think in a specific fashion. However, when it comes to narrative, it's more of giving information about the essential topic, as this lecture is, and it aims to enhance the interest and the inquisitiveness about a specific topic. So that is one of the major differences. Now coming on to the medieval and the modern literature. Now most of the medieval and the modern literatures have been seen either in the didactic or the narrative styles of writing. When it comes to medieval writing, you had three important segments that we would discuss today, which is the Persian sect, the Urdu sect, and the Hindu sect of writing. Now here all the three writings had more or less the similar way in which they evolved and developed, but the role has been defined under the different languages for the common people in a different fashion. For example, when we talk about Persian, the roots of Persian were similar to the Sanskrit roots, but the ways under which the Persian was preached was much different than the Sanskrit was preached. So Sanskrit, most of the traditions were given through the Guru Shishya Parampara that were there. When it comes to the Persian language, you had the schools, where the mansabs, where you had the major schooling systems that were there. Now when it comes to the evolution and the development, you had Amir Khusrau's contribution that is indeed very, very important for the development of the Persian language. Now you had some of the major scholars and their works. Now most of the works that were compiled by themselves were what were known as Tuzuk-i-Babari, Ain-e, so those are the works on Babar, on Akbar, that were written by them. Similarly, you had Jahangir's work as Tuzuk-i-Jahangiri. So that was one of the major classic development of the Mughal rhyme and the developments in the language. Now again, Malik Muhammad Jayasi, who composed Padmavat, had been very, very important during this period. When it comes to Urdu, now Amir Khusrau is not only attributed to Persian but also to Urdu. In Urdu, you had developments of numerous poet styles by Mirza Ghalib. You had Qawwali style, which developed later. Similarly, you had numerous Urdu poets who were there, who were the Dard, Mir Taki Mir. So those were some of the major Urdu scholars during that time. And Iqbal wrote Sare Jahan Se Acha as Bange Dara, which was again very, very popular during that time. Most of the nationalist styles of writing was didactic in nature, and the idea was to influence. So Sir Syed Ahmad Khan's work was notable in this fashion. The next is the Hindu style of writing. Now in the Hindi style of writing, as we said, Sanskrit was a predominant language, and later on you had Pali and Prakrit that came in. You had Prithviraj Raso, which was considered as the first Hindi book, and then you had numerous series of Bhakti writers who were there. Kabir was one of the most popular writers during that time. Then you had Tulsidas, who wrote in Braj, and he wrote the Ramcharitramanas in Braj. Similarly, you had Surdas, who wrote the Sur Sagar, which was the devotional life to Lord Krishna. So as we could see, each of these stories were devotional in nature. Mirabai's devotion had been again important. The next was the series of modern literature, which was also known as the Adhunik Kal. Now during this Adhunik Kal or modern literature, you had various regional languages that started to flourish. So let's say you had Bengali literature that developed, you had Gujarati, Odia literatures that developed, the Punjabi, the Kashmiri literatures that prospered. So if we talk about all of those, let's understand the evolution of the yug. So we had the four important yugs that were there. So you had the Bhartendu yug, the Dwivedi, the Chayavad yug, and finally the contemporary yug, which is the present day yug. And this is what is called as the evolution under the Hindi writings. And Bhartendu Harish Chandra wrote one of the very famous dramas, which was Andher Nagari, and it focused on the Durdasha of Bharat, or the scenario or the condition of Bharat, and it focused on how across the yugs the developments would vary. Now, when it comes to regional languages, you had, as we said, Bengali, Odia, and Assamese, which was classified under one division. The languages being more or less of the same origin. You had numerous scholars whose work has been undoubtedly very, very important. For example, Raja Ram Mohan Roy's contribution to Bengali, and you had the Rabindra Sangeet that was originated. Similarly, you had Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay's work on Anand Mat and Vande Mataram composition, which was important. Gitanjali being written by Rabindranath Tagore was another important composition during that time. Odia literature was again important. Sarla Das and Radhanath Rai were some of the major scholars of Odia literature, and Assamese literature was dominated mainly by the Burunjis during this time. Now, this was one of the sects. Coming on to the west. So, this was about the East India. Coming on to the west of the India, you had Gujarati, Rajasthani and Sindhi language streams that were important. Now, Narsingh Mehta wrote numerous devotional songs, and he hailed from the local traditional regions of Gujarat, and therefore you had the Lord Krishna, which was one of the major focuses in the Gujarati text or the Gujarati literature during that time. Similarly, Govardhan Ran talked about and wrote on the Gujarati novels, and he created a series of Gujarati novels, and later on this was telecasted as numerous TV series channels. So that was one of the major forms of writing. Similarly, when it comes to the major text of Gujarat, it is in the form of Dhola Maru, which is the story of Dingal and Pingal that has been written, and the Sindhi literature talks about the Mirza Kailash Beg, whose compositions have been very, very important. Coming on to the Hindi section, you had Munshi's writing as fiction and non-fiction novels, which have been very, very important. The next was Kashmiri literature. Now, Kashmiri literature is indeed important. The Yojana August 2020 edition covers the regions of Kashmir, Gujarat in detail, and you have a numerous section on the literature, the culture, the festivals that have been discussed. So, very important. Please cover that section carefully. That lecture has been covered into two different videos, so cover both of those. Very, very important. Now, when it comes to Kashmiri literature, Kalhan's Raj Tarangani has been one of the most important writings, and then the Kashmiri writings by Noordin had been very important. Most of the compositions were in the local Dogri language that was there. When it comes to Punjabi literature, two important language streams, Gurumukhi and Persian, had been part of it. Gurumukhi had been more popular when it comes to the religious books and the religious, the Adi Granths that have been written for Guru Gobind Sahib. And later on, you had the stories of Heer Ranjha that have been popular in Punjabi literature. When it comes to Marathi literature, Gyaneshwar's work on Kirtans have been very, very important. He also gave a detailed commentary on Bhagavad Gita. One of the oldest female writers from Maharashtra is Gyanbai, and again one of the major famous saints from Maharashtra. You have Eknath, Tukaram, Ramdas. So those were some of the major bhakti poets of that time. Later on, you had works of Bal Gangadhar Tilak, who had been very, very important in the Marathi literature and awakening of the Indian national movement. So those were some of the major highlights from the modern or the Adhunik Kal. Definitely during the modern period you have numerous literatures that have come up. We have just picked up some of the most important ones for you to remember. So definitely go through those, and the works and their authors are important. They could be directly asked as match list questions in most of the objective examinations or the MCQ based examinations. So cover those carefully. All these details would be available as handouts, so just check out the YouTube lecture handouts for more details. Have a wonderful day ahead.